GarageBand versus Logic Pro X. Which one do you use? In this video, I'm going to go over the key differences between each of them to help you decide if GarageBand or Logic Pro X is better for you. It's a big question to ask yourself is, if you're deciding between Logic Pro X and GarageBand, then what do you want to make? Is it professional sounding recordings? Are you a singer-songwriter where you just want to make demos? This is an important question to make because it really will depend on what platform is better for you. For an example, I'm a singer-songwriter myself. I use Logic Pro X because I'm taking my demos to a certain extent where I do want the features that Logic Pro X has that GarageBand doesn't have. However, if you're just a beginning musician or just a beginner songwriter and you want to get your feet wet with recording music or producing music, perhaps GarageBand might be a better fit for you. So ask yourself first, what kind of music do you want to make? Now let's get into the key differences, which are the interface and the functions of each platform. And if you don't know, GarageBand is free if you have a Mac computer. So you can download right away from the App Store. It's free to use. Logic Pro X, on the other hand, is $200, but that is a one-time fee. At a fundamental level, GarageBand is essentially the same as Logic Pro X. However, Logic Pro X takes you further in your music and production capabilities because it gives you more high-fidelity features. You can do more fine-tuned editing, and you can essentially just do more. And so let's get into what actually that means. Here I am in Logic Pro X. This is a song I've been working on, and if I switch over tabs, this is now me in GarageBand. We can see we have tracks going down from top to bottom here, and essentially the interfaces have the same colors. They look more or less the same. Just noticeably though, Logic Pro X looks like there's way more going on. Not to mention this song is just bigger, but there's more icons, there's more things just to look at. Where if we go back to GarageBand, it just seems more simple. There's less buttons, there's less icons, and essentially that's what GarageBand is. It is the slimmed down version. There's just less things to worry about. So let's start at the top left here. We have the GarageBand library icon, information bar, controls window, and scissors window. For example, if we're on this Steinway grand piano track, we can look at the controls and change the controls here. We can also change the EQ of our piano. Then we also have the ability to edit and zoom in and actually edit the notes of our piano. The library icon is essentially the preset instruments that come with GarageBand. If we hop over to Logic Pro X now and do the same thing on a track, for example, I also have a piano track. It's the same piano that I have in GarageBand because it's exactly coming from the same place. You'll notice I have a couple more icons here. I do have this editor window like I did in GarageBand where I can do the same thing and edit the notes. I have my controls window where I can edit the sounds of the piano, and it looks exactly the same because it is exactly the same. I also have the information bar, the library icon. Here is where I can choose different sounds like I did with GarageBand, but with Logic Pro X you get more sounds. So you'll notice in piano here in Logic Pro X I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different pianos, not to mention a whole other experimental piano section. And if I switch over to GarageBand under piano, I only have the one Steinway grand piano available to me. So that's a big difference right there, is Logic just comes with way more instruments and way more sounds available to you. Here's the information bar, which gives us yellow helpful hints on every icon, which is great if you're just learning. And if we go over to GarageBand, we have this same helpful hint section as well. Let's go back over to Logic and we'll notice a couple more different icons. We have this inspector icon. So if we're still on our piano track here and we press the inspector icon, we will get this little section which shows us what type of plugins we have on our track, and it will show us anything that we're bussing out, and we'll be able to play with our volumes here, add new tracks, add presets. It gives us a quick look at all the plugins and effects on our track and what our track is essentially doing instead of us opening up the mixer. And so that would be the next thing, is this mixer icon, and if we open this up, we'll see our mixer. And this is something that is just not available in GarageBand. And this is essentially the entire mixer of our track. So we have all our tracks here vertically, where we have different pan pots here, where we can edit things. We can add plugins here, compressors, dynamics. We can edit plugins, we can change EQs. Now, if we go over to GarageBand for a second, you'll notice that there is no mixer icon or inspector icon as well. So how do you add plugins, right? And how do you change the volume faders and everything else in GarageBand? Well, GarageBand, you can still do this stuff. It's just a little hidden and it's just not as flexible at all. For example, there is no mixer in Logic. You have to just go here and use the volume faders that you have to mix your song. You can go to each track and then open up the controls. And you'll see here where we have plugins. Let me just close that to get some space. This is where we have plugins. So similar design as we would jumping over to Logic. Under our piano here, we have channel EQ, a compressor, and a tape delay where we can add other plugins. It's the exact same thing over in GarageBand where you have a channel EQ, a compressor, and a delay. We can add more plugins here. These are all the same icons. These are just simple fast and forwards, stop and plays and records. And if we go over to GarageBand, exact same icons. This display is where you can customize what you see. There are a lot more options available with Logic. For example, in GarageBand here, we have beats and project, beats and time, beats and time. And then if we go over to Logic, we can customize this display, actually making it quite custom. We can add things. If I open up the custom control bar and display, I can add things that I want to see in my display as well. For example, if I want to vary speed the entire track and make the entire track slower, make the entire track faster, I can do that and make this whole track 1% faster. These are things that you cannot do in GarageBand. We have a replace icon here and a solo icon, tuner icon as well, which is not on because I don't have the instruments plugged in. If we go over to GarageBand, we see we have the tuner, but we're missing a replace and the solo tracks button. But we have the count in and metronome, which is also available on Logic and the same design in UX. And then lastly, these 4 icons we have in Logic, which 3 of them are available in GarageBand. If I switch back, I have these 3. In Logic Pro X, we have these. This is called event details, which basically means anything that you do in Logic inside this project, it's going to make an event. And so if you want to move back to something that you thought was really good or you made a mistake, you can go back in the events and replace some of the work that you thought you lost. In GarageBand, this is just not available. The last biggest difference that you probably noticed already, that if we're in Logic Pro X here, you can see a lot of information at the top here. We have different tools and settings. In GarageBand, we don't have any of that. And that's, again, the high fidelity capabilities that Logic Pro X gives you that GarageBand doesn't. So simply as an example, if we go to Logic, we have tools which are very handy when it comes to editing audio or editing MIDI, any tracks really. When you have a recording and you're producing it, you need to be switching back to tools very quickly. For example, you want to go to your pencil tool quickly, or you want to cut things up, or you want to crossfade things. You need to be switching between tools very quickly, and you can do this in Logic very quickly by key shortcuts and switching tools. You can't do this in GarageBand at all, except if you do press Command when you're on this view here, you can have a pencil, and that's the only available tool that GarageBand gives you. So that's a good segue to talking about the key differences when it comes to the functions between Logic Pro X versus GarageBand. A big difference between the two for a long time was something called flex time, which is something really basic that you'd want in an audio service so you can edit audio and edit the timing of audio. But now GarageBand has this service. So if you didn't know that, you can go on any audio track here and we can press E to bring up the editor. And this is inside Logic, and we can press this button which turns on flex for our lead vocal. And so with Logic, we get flex time and we get flex pitch and a lot more capabilities to edit this piece of audio. But if we go to GarageBand, it is available in GarageBand now. So if we go to our piece of audio here, double click to bring up the editor, we can see that it has the same exact icon here, and we can turn on flex and we can actually start dragging and dropping, editing the timing of our audio so make sure we're perfectly in the beat. However, when it does come to flex, Logic has something called flex pitch. So here we go, under this flex time drop down, we can go up to flex pitch, and there we can actually edit the pitch of our audio, which is super valuable if you want to be pitch perfect and sound perfect. With GarageBand, if we go back here, we don't have any other available flex options. It's only flex time. Another big difference between the two when it comes to audio and tracking vocals is vocal comping. And when you're recording vocals, a lot of the times you want to do more than one take, and Logic makes that really easy for you. The features are not available in GarageBand. So for example, we are in Logic here and we have a lead vocal track. Let's just duplicate that track and record a simple audio with my voice. So I'm recording audio with my voice. This would be like take 1 in a vocal track. And now I'm gonna do take 2. Recording audio, this would be take 2, GarageBand versus Logic Pro. Okay, so what Logic Pro X does, and what is so great about Logic Pro X, is this makes a comp for you. So if you are doing vocal takes and you have your take 1 here where you're like, oh, I really like this intro part to take 1, but I don't like the rest, but I do like that part of take 2, then you can make a comp and that will make a crossfade for you. If we go over to GarageBand and try to do the same on our audio track, if we recreate a track and just record some audio, I'm gonna do the same. So now I'm recording audio in GarageBand. This is take 1, and let's do a take 2. And now I'm recording audio. This is take 2. So you'll see it just deleted that first part of our take 1, and now we're left with half of our take 1 here and the first part of our take 2, which it just doesn't make a comp for you. So a big difference there if you are really into doing vocals and vocal tracking. Let's talk about the differences when it comes to mixing tracks and adding effects. So we are in Logic here and we just have this vocal takes that we just added, let's just say, and we can pull up this inspector window here and quickly add effects, or we can copy channel presets from other channels. For example, let's say I really like the effects I put on my lead vocal recent. I can go to lead vocal here and I can say copy channel strip setting, go to this, and I can paste channel strip setting. Things like that, which make it really quick to copy and paste different effects instead of starting it over and having to redo the whole channel strip setting. In GarageBand, let's go over here. Unfortunately, you can't do that. If we go to our audio track here, we have under our controls, our main plugins here, where we don't have like channel strip settings where we can't copy and paste from different tracks. So that will save you a lot of time in Logic if you are using like big channel strips and you have a lot of effects that you want to reuse a lot. In GarageBand, that's just not possible to do. On the same note, in the inspector window here with Logic Pro X, we're able to bus out different effects to our stereo out. For example, this bus 8 is a reverb. In GarageBand, I don't have the option to do any busing. There is no busing to go to a stereo out channel. So you have to put the reverbs on the track itself and not busing it out. Okay, let's talk about mixing now and bring up our mixer in Logic Pro X. You can bring the mixer up inside the view, but you can also bring it up in a separate window by pressing Command 2, and that's really helpful when you have two screens. Sometimes you can have your mixer on one screen and your main view in the other. But this is our main mixer in Logic Pro X, which is just not available in GarageBand. And in this view, you can quickly be copying and pasting different effects from each tracks, but it also just gives you a good high-level view of what's going on. You can press Command and you can grab different tracks and raise the faders of all the tracks that you've grabbed, which is actually something you just can't do in GarageBand. Let's go back to GarageBand and if let's say we're mixing our track here, we like the sound of the mix, but both the piano and drums we want the faders to go down at the same time. Unfortunately, we can't click both tracks by pressing Command or Shift and highlighting both tracks. So you have to go one at a time and change the faders. Not a huge deal, but just it seems like a simple thing that they missed on that. Another thing in the mixing board is metering. And this is a big thing when you're mixing a song because you want to know how loud your tracks are. For example, if we play this song in the background, you'll be able to see the volumes starting up here. And you can see that this bass is peaking at a -25 and this piano at -24. So that gives you a reference of how loud things are and what things you might need to make louder or make softer. And then you have a stereo out here where you can see, oh, am I peaking in my entire track or is everything okay? Right now my stereo out is at a -3.6, which is fine. With GarageBand there is no metering, so I actually don't know where tracks are peaking and at what dB. I do have the view here where if I play this track, I can see the colors and I can see this audio is getting yellow, and I might be able to drop that down. But when you're doing professional production work, you do want to make sure that you are looking at the metering. Another thing you may have noticed is some of these effects in Logic Pro X here are from third-party plugins, and you can actually get third-party plugins in GarageBand too. So that's one key difference that used to be a difference but is no longer a difference. So in GarageBand you can, for example, if you have a plugin from like Fab Filters or using their EQ or their limiters or reverbs or whatever, you can use those in GarageBand as you can use them exactly the same in Logic 2. Automation is available in GarageBand as it is in Logic Pro X, but Logic Pro X extends it more. For example, if we are on my track here in Logic and we press A, we can pull up the automation. For example, if I want to put automation on this vocal or this bass or this piano, I have the option to put a volume automation, smart controls, many different types of automation. This is still available in GarageBand. If I go here and also press A, I can go to my grand piano here and see the different types of automation I can put on as well. The key difference here is when I go to Logic, you can see I have read, touch, latch, and write. Well, that helps when you're doing automation because, for example, when I do a latch automation and I actually press record on my track now and play, I can use the filters on my MIDI controllers and the keys on my MIDI controllers to actually do the automation for me. And in GarageBand, we don't have any of those options at all. We can't even choose read, latch, or write. So that's a limiting factor to your automations if you want to extend them more, which is why people use Logic Pro X, because it's just in general it has more you can do. Would be a big one that I use a lot are saving projects as alternatives in Logic. So if we go up to File, and instead of just like saving a copy, you can save a project alternative and a new alternative here. And what that's going to give you is you can save, like, for example, this song called Don't Start Now, maybe like mix, May 1st. Because sometimes you do a mix and you really, really like those settings, but then you switch it in the afternoon and you really want to revert back to what you did. And so you can save an alternative mix and you can actually just go back to that alternative mix. Something you can't do in GarageBand. So if we go to GarageBand, there's no option to save things as alternatives. And so that's not really great if you are working on a big production and you're switching a lot of different dials and turns out like you wish you could go back to that one you had in the morning. In the same vein of that, when we're exporting our projects and we want to share our songs, for example, if we're in Logic here and we want to bounce a project, we can go bounce, we can do regions in place or tracks in place. We can bounce the entire project. We can also export files as MIDI, export selections as MIDI. It gives us many more options to share and export projects. When we move over to GarageBand, that exports song to disk, we can share it to iTunes, Media Browser, SoundCloud, that kind of thing. But there's no bouncing in place, which really limits your capabilities here. If you really like a track and you want to have it mixed, I believe what you'll have to do is get someone that has Logic Pro X and they can open up the GarageBand file in Logic Pro X, and then they can bounce the stems for you there. I think that would be the only workaround. As you probably figured out by now, Logic Pro X is really just more extensive in terms of their functionality when we're comparing it to GarageBand. And that's not to say that GarageBand is a bad product at all. I used GarageBand for many years before I used Logic Pro X. If you're just beginning and you don't know anything about music production, I wouldn't suggest going into Logic Pro X right away. It can be overwhelming because there's so much you can do with it. So start with GarageBand. If you've been using GarageBand for 2 or 3 years, maybe it's your time to step up to Logic Pro X and start getting more in-depth into your editing and your music production. I hope this review of GarageBand versus Logic Pro X helped you figure out what was better for you in some type of way. I'm a singer-songwriter myself, so please feel free to check out some of my music. I'll leave a couple links in the description. Hope to see you in the next video.